On this Tuesday edition of the OFN Today, Adam Patrick, Vikings writer for thevikingage.com at Fansided, will try and explain what the heck's going wrong in Minnesota before their big game in Philly this week. We'll talk fantasy football with the managing director for RotoExperts.com, Scott Engel, before we discuss all the latest from the weekend in pro and college football with Dave Cokin of Covers.com as the OFN Today on the Our-Lads Football Radio Network starts now. All right, thanks for tuning in to another edition of the OFN Today. It's Tuesday, October 2nd, 2018. I'm Greg DePalma. We're going to wrap up all the key headlines from the weekend of pro and college football. It's what we do every Tuesday here on the show. The OFN Today brought to you by ourlads.com with the best pro and college football depth charts on the net. And RotoExperts.com for the great in-depth fantasy analysis and insights you're going to get from Scott Engel and his team. Visit RotoExperts.com. You'll receive the exclusive Edge in-season fantasy football package. At checkout, just enter the promo code THEKING for your special discount and join the live 24/7 expert chat room. And Scott and I, by the way, I will be debating the king coming up in about a half hour. So I probably will get my ass handed to me, but because the king's the king. I ain't the king in fantasy football. Scott's the king. So I'm probably in a bit of trouble there. But that's okay. I think it should be fun. I mean, being one of the top fantasy owners in my league, different from being the king. Scott's a kick-ass fantasy expert. I'm not. But there's a lot of fun to it. And you know what I've enjoyed about fantasy football myself over the years, and the reason I think that I've been able to have some success is, and sometimes even over guys that are pure pro football, fantasy football guys. I'm not saying Scott is. I'm just throwing out experience over the years, or Scott isn't, is the fact that I have a lot of experience, of course, working in the industry in college, probably just as much as the NFL. So there are a lot of players in college football that you have an eye on, guys that are super talented. They make it to the pros, and you're always told to stay away from rookies, and I believe that, truly. I mean, unless you're looking for a sleeper running back or maybe a receiver. I mean, just look at what Ridley's doing, maybe. You kind of stay away from most rookies. But what happens is you get to the second season, the third season, and sometimes rookies that don't identify themselves to the pro football audience are sitting around, and they get lost. And if they're not making a name for themselves right away as rookies, then they're kind of thrown into the pile of free agents, the rest of the so-called has-beens or journeymen. And I think they can get lost there. And there are a lot of times that you recognize that, hey, there are guys that are very talented that just need the right change of scenery, just need to stay healthy, whatever the case may be. And that's an important part of it. It's a small part, though. Because if you're really big in the fantasy football, either just as a player or an expert like someone like Scott, and the people that are over at Roto Experts, that's what they live and breathe, and that's why. And you know what? They should be experts. I say that all the time when I talk on all my shows, and I talk about the media, and I especially former players who are given an unbelievable opportunity to go from making millions on the field and then get thrown into the broadcast booth or the studio with no broadcasting experience, and they are given the opportunity to take your job. That's what they're doing. They're taking your job. But we don't. I mean, people who write people who are broadcasters, we can't just at some point during our careers go, hey, you know what? I feel like playing football. I'm going to go play football. And you knock on the door of the football team. Hey, Mr. Football Owner. Hey, Mr. GM. I'd like to play football for you. And because I'm like a kick-ass broadcaster, I expect to get the job. Of course, I got to audition for the part, but I'll audition for it. Go ahead, set me up. I'll have a good audition. I have a nice little audition, one-time audition, and that's it. And you give me the job. How about that? That would be awesome. Wouldn't it be great if we could all have that opportunity, just like former athletes do? That would be great. And I just love it when the former athletes, and you listen to all of them, whether it's ESPN, I mean, they're all over the place. FS1, all over the place. And I'm telling you right now, 95% of these guys are lazy. And they don't, and it's not that they don't know what's going on because they played the freaking sport. But they're lazy. They think because they did play the sport that they don't have to work. Okay? So, and this goes for anybody that's on the air covering football. And especially, you know what I'm getting sick and tired of are the play-by-play guys. I mean, Greg Gumbel's awful. I'm sick of him. Enough of him already. There are guys like Gumbel and all the way down the line. You know what the play-by-play job is in the NFL or college football? I'm going to tell you simply what the number one job is. To learn the depth chart. Numbers and names, and you call them and identify them and let the audience know. That's the number one job. And it has gotten lost. Nobody expects it anymore. They've gotten lazy. How difficult is it to spend an entire freaking week looking at 2 team depth charts for the game you're covering? Going over the numbers, going over the names, especially the guys that you should have a lot of familiarity with. Getting the opportunity to sit inside the meeting room with a coach and have him tell you part of the game plan. So you're gonna be ahead of everybody and be prepared more when you're in the booth calling the game. And you still can't do something simple like when there's a tackle or whatever, or some sort of play. It could be a bad play. And as this is going on, you can't quickly identify the player. That's your job. I don't need the play-by-play guy to tell me anything else. The play-by-play guy is not an analyst. The guy that sits by him is an analyst. Most of those guys suck too. Again, those are the former athletes. Those are the lazy former athletes who don't prepare. And they think they could sit there in the booth and watch the game and just decide, okay, I'm going to comment on it. And that's why most of them suck. But they played the game. So that makes them broadcast experts because they played the game. That's not what being in the booth's about. It's a completely different job. Being an analyst has very little to do with playing the game. We're not a coach, and we're not playing a game. We're analyzing it. And if you're not good enough for it, you shouldn't be there. But these producers, the people that hire these guys, they don't get it. Somebody needs to take a stand one of these years, and I believe they will. Mark my words. You will get somebody, some sort of analyst in a booth one of these days that is not a former player. When that happens and that guy does a really good job, the rest will follow. And we'll start getting rid of these former athletes who don't know anything about how to call a game or how to analyze a game. When I look at guys like Greg Gumbel, though, and the rest of those play-by-play guys, that's the easiest job in the world. But they have egos. So I need to get in my 2 cents about what's going on. No, nobody cares. Call the friggin' game. Tell me who made the play. That's what I want to know. Everybody, of course, loves Pro Football Focus. You want to know why? Because they want to know what every player's doing. They want to know if a player's having a good game, having a bad game. How do I know if a player's having a good game or a bad game if when a play is made, you don't tell me who that guy is? You'll hear these play-by-play guys going, "Oh, great play by the defense." What do you mean great play by the defense? It was a great play by 23. Who the frig is 23? That's your job. I don't know how we got on that from fantasy, but I hope Scott's ready because I'm in a debating kind of mood. It has nothing to do with fantasy or broadcasters. It has to do with me. Again, I don't know why I do it. This is why I do it. And I probably should do a jet show later because I'm getting sick and tired of the New York media. And I'm also getting sick and tired of the Vancouver media, but that's a different sport. That's hockey. That's a different show. I'm getting sick and tired of the media in general. Just constantly, every time something goes wrong, they just want to hammer and hammer and hammer about the same old stuff over and over again. It is just so boring. And I could imagine what's going on in Minnesota nowadays. You give Kirk Cousins $90 million. And this is what's going on with the team. Now, I don't know if you can blame Kirk Cousins for last week. I mean, they moved the ball up and down the field. That ain't Kirk Cousins' fault. It's the defense. But what's going on? Why all of a sudden, I mean, is this a team chemistry thing? I mean, is the quarterback, is somehow Kirk Cousins, is he some sort of virus? He seems like a nice guy. But he could never win in Washington, and we figured out they're no good. But he'll go to Minnesota, and with, I mean, come on. I mean, how can they not be better with Kirk Cousins? But they're getting worse. So why is that? Well, let's try to find out. That's why I asked Adam Patrick to come on. He's the Viking writer for the VikingAge.com at Fansided, and we haven't talked to him in a few months since training camp. So, Adam, thanks a lot for chiming in here. We've got to find out. We all want to know what's going on in Minnesota.
Well, the sky is not falling.
Okay.
Unless you look on social media at some fans, freaking out. But
how badly?
The defense, they could be playing a little better, but at the same time, they ran into a juggernaut last week.
Sure,
against
that.
The Rams.
I get that.
But against the Bills, it's clearly obvious with the Packers win this weekend that the Vikings pretty much looked past the Bills and probably didn't game plan as well or at all.
I agree with that.
For that game.
That's their sandwich game. Typical sandwich game. I agree with that. It happens. So,
but they got a win in week one against when Jimmy Garoppolo was there, and then they had a chance to win in week two in Lambeau with Aaron Rodgers on the field, but their kicker decided to miss 3 field goals, 2 in overtime. So I think they're not. And
Cousins played really well in the fourth quarter and overtime.
Yeah. He's played really well for the most of the season. He's fumbled a couple times, but I don't put that all on him. The offensive line hasn't been that great. They haven't been able to protect anybody. So I don't put that all on Cousins.
Sure.
Obviously, you have to hold on to the ball, but he's doing well. I think he has around 1,300 yards already. 10 touchdowns, just 2 interceptions. So he's been, mostly the reason they have been able to stay in games, especially in Green Bay and when they've played the Rams.
Yeah.
So
it's the defense. Something's wrong with the defense.
And I don't even know if it's that, because their defense was playing, pretty good up until against the Rams. I mean, I was looking at some stuff, and last year they allowed, I believe, like 7 touchdowns in the first 7 or 6 touchdowns in the first 3 games last season, and that's the same amount they have allowed in the first 3 games this season, and that all changed against the Rams. So I wouldn't put it all on the defense, and I think the defense has been put in some bad situations, especially in the Bills game when the Vikings are turning the ball over deep in their own territory. I believe the Bills, like 3 of their 5 drives were 25 yards or less. So they're scoring drives. So I wouldn't put that all on the defense. And then looking at past trends for the Vikings, both of the last two times they won the NFC North, 2015 and 2017, they both began the season by losing two of their first four games. And then in 2016, when they won all four of their first four games, they didn't even make the playoffs.
I like it.
So
That's good.
They've lost two games this year. So maybe that trend will follow.
Sure, that's a good one. And so, what about the secondary, though? Tell me about what it is that. Look, the Rams are the Rams. We get that, but still, the Vikings defense and that secondary is supposed to be one of the top in football, which means that even against the top offense, I mean, we always talk about this for years in football. Great defense beats a great offense. That's the way it is. That's just the way it's always been. Not 100% of the time, but on average, if you match up a great defense with a great offense, the great defensive team's going to win. But this wasn't even a contest between the two. Why? What's the issue there with why the Vikings allowed the Rams to just run roughshod against them?
I think there was just a lot of confusion, and there has been this year. They've got some younger guys out there playing defense. Terrence Newman retired. I think his loss has made a big impact, even though he's still on the sideline coaching.
Sure.
He's not on the field getting people in the right spots.
Who's his replacement out there then?
Rookie Mike Hughes, their first-round pick.
Okay.
He's been playing a lot, and then Mackenzie Alexander. He's in his third year, but he's been on the field a bunch, but he's been having a bunch of hiccups too this season. So that's something they got to get sorted out, and I think they can, because Mike Zimmer has a reputation of his strength being in the defensive backfield with the corners and those guys. So I think that's something that can be fixed, and I'm sure he's fuming at their performance, especially against the Rams. But as far as the Rams game goes, I think they were they're caught on a short week, on the road on the West Coast. Mm-hmm. Didn't have much time to prepare. Actually, they probably were preparing longer than the 3 days because of their performance against the Bills. But the Vikings actually, under Mike Zimmer, haven't really played that well on the road, on grass fields, against winning teams. I believe they give up around 30 points a game, their last 6 games like that. So
high-scoring game this week then, huh?
Yeah. so Thursdays, the Eagles don't have a winning record, so that might have something to do with it.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
But it's just something that's happened. They just don't play that well on grass. In the NFC Championship game, they got blown out, and I believe they've allowed over 30 points on the road on grass fields against a bunch of their opponents. So, it's just something that happens. They have that luxury of playing indoors eight times of the year, and that helps their defense, especially with the crowd noise and knowing that environment. So I think there was a lot of factors going into the Rams games, not just the defensive backfield, but the defense could have played better. Obviously, I know Mike Zimmer is not very happy with the performance that his defense had on Thursday, and I think having the extra time this week to prepare for the Eagles, will benefit them a lot.
How about the front seven? Anybody that is underperforming? Any particular issues that you can point to of why and if anybody is not playing up to standard?
Anthony Barr is not playing the greatest. I think people saw him get burned a bunch against the Rams, but that wasn't really his fault. He was just trying to make up for some guys who weren't in the right places, so I can't put all that on him. But for most of the season, he's not been the greatest. He was their first round pick in 2014, I believe.
Yes.
So he's expected to be a Pro Bowl caliber player, which he he's made the Pro Bowl the past couple of years, but.
He's a very hard guy to analyze because he seems like he has these up and down seasons. Sometimes he'll have a bad year and a great year. I can't figure this guy out, whether he's a really good player or just maybe just a very inconsistent one.
Yeah, I think the Vikings drafted him more for his pass rushing skills.
Okay.
Because at UCLA he had like over 20 sacks. But, that hasn't really been utilized, I feel like, in the last couple of seasons, and teams have tried to exploit him in coverage, which they've been able to do.
Makes sense.
But it's kind of weird because this summer at training camp, Anthony Barr was working with like the Vikings defensive line, working on his pass rushing skills, and they haven't really put him in like the Vikings, they really haven't put him in a situation where that can be utilized, and instead he's just been running around the field, getting hurdled by Josh Allen and getting penalties called on him, and getting burned by Rams receivers and running backs. So he's in a contract year, which also is kind of weird because usually guys in a contract year just play out of their minds. But it looks good that the Vikings didn't give him an extension this summer. But we'll see if he keeps up this play or improves, and then we'll see. If the Vikings want to bring him back next year, or they decide to let him go, especially since they have so much money put into Kirk Cousins and Stephon Diggs and a couple other guys.
Do they have enough pass rushing up front? Because you take a look at them on paper, and okay, Hunter, he's big time, but Griffin, I mean, he's up there a little bit in age, and you don't really see a whole lot else. So, and I guess maybe that's why you were talking about Barr looking up at that spot. So, is that an issue? Are they not getting enough pass rush?
Yeah, I think in the first two games they were with Everson Griffin on the field. He makes a huge difference, and his absence in the past 2 weeks has made a big impact. I believe the Vikings had over 40 quarterback pressures in the first two games with Griffin on the field, and then I think they had just over 25 in the last two without him out there. So his absence has made a big difference.
Yeah. Well, he had a great year last year, didn't he?
Yeah. He's coming off a great year.
Yep.
And he's just relentless. He goes 100% on every play, giving offensive linemen a bunch of trouble, and his presence on the defensive line also allows Danielle Hunter to not have to worry about double teams so much. And then I think they're expecting maybe a little more out of Sheldon Richardson so far this year. He's played well, especially in the first couple of games.
Tell me
but
about
I think
it. I'm a Jet fan. I understand.
He also benefited from Griffin's presence on the line,
Yes.
allowing for less double teams. They have some talented younger guys depth wise, with Stephen Weatherly and Deshaun Bauer, but those guys aren't Everson Griffin. They're not second team All Pros or perennial Pro Bowl players every year. So obviously his absence is affecting the team, but at the same time, his situation is one where he needs to take as much time as possible to get right before he returns to the football field. Football is secondary at this point, in terms of what he's dealing with. So the Vikings just have to figure out a way to get more pass rush without him at this point.
Yeah, and that's why I mentioned Griffin's age, not because he's over the hill. He's in the prime of his career, but he's also 30, 31, whatever he is. And when you're at that age, it would be nice to be able to have a little bit of break every once in a while and for other players to step in and contribute, and that's just not happening right now. And then throw in the fact that he's not even playing, and it really just shows you that there's a big issue there. So what's his status? Are we going to see him back when?
Well, Mike Zimmer said he's not coming. He's not practicing this week, and he won't be playing against the Eagles. So week 6 appears to be the earliest that he'll return by. But I believe yesterday NFL Media's Tom Pelissero said that Griffin is out indefinitely, and then the Vikings yesterday were working out some free agent defensive linemen, and they just signed another one to their practice squad. So, it's a different situation. It's not a normal, reason for a player being absent, but at the same time, I think the Vikings are, a good organization to deal with a situation that Griffin is going through. They've had some players in the past with similar issues.
Okay.
they've been able to succeed. So it's just they have to go on, without him. They gotta figure it out. And when he returns and if he returns, then that's great. And the Vikings will be very happy. But they have enough talent on that defense to make up for his loss. They had 11 of their 12 starters, or 10 of their 11 starters from a year ago return this year.
Yep.
They had Xavier Rhodes, Harrison Smith, Eric Kendricks. They have all this talent on defense. They should be able to play well without one player on their defense.
Yeah, I got to tell you right now, I still think, now I don't know what the schedule is like. I haven't looked ahead past Philadelphia, but of course it's a tough schedule being a first-place team no matter what. But you play the Rams and the Eagles and back-to-back. That's obviously as tough as it gets. But the division still, when I look at it, I today, right now, I'm still picking the Vikings. Again, I don't care. Again, I'm not looking at the schedule, and maybe it's Murderer's Row for the next month. I don't know, but
it's, the next 5 games, they only have one team that has a winning record right now, and that's the Saints. That's the Saints, and they play them at home.
So Saints and Eagles in the next 5. Those are the tough games for the next 5 weeks.
And they play the Cardinals, who are 0-4. They play the Jets, who are 1-3.
That's a win.
They play the Lions, who are 1-3.
That should be a win.
and the Saints.
All right. Well, there you go. So they should be able. If they all they got to do is win one of the games against the.
And 3 out of the 5 are at home. So
so they should be able to go 4-1.
Yeah,
in
they
their
should
next
be able
5.
to get back on track.
Yeah,
definitely. That's why I'm not about to jump the boat or whatever after 4 weeks.
All right. So what about the fans? What are they complaining about? Because you have a logical way of breaking everything down, which gets me, again, that's why I like having guests like you on, because it gives me, like I said, I think, okay, that's I'm in. I buy everything that you're saying, and I still think they'll win the division. But we know fans can be illogical. So where's the illogic coming from?
Well, I've seen probably way too many. Maybe articles or posts written about Mike Zimmer's, seat getting warm or hot.
Really?
And I'm like,
is that a fan or writers?
Somebody wrote about it.
Really?
Okay. So that's not the case at all. The Vikings are coming off a season where they made the NFC Championship, and they've won the NFC North in 2 of the past 3 years. So Mike Zimmer's not going anywhere, even if the Vikings have a losing record this year. But they think that the defense is crumbling, and I think that Rams game has a lot to do with it. But I think if you take a deeper look at the numbers, they're very similar to what they were a year ago.
Sure.
And some people believe that ever since the second half of the Saints game and divisional playoff, that the defense hasn't been the same. But at the same time, the Vikings have actually, they've had a bunch of turnovers on their own side of the field, which doesn't put your defense in good situations.
Mm-hmm.
The Vikings defense was at their best, and I think any defense is at their best when the opposing offense has to go,
Sure.
3/4 length of the field, and the Vikings were good at that. And then this year they've had to deal with other stuff like Everson Griffin.
Sure,
and
that's a big loss.
The kicking situation.
Mm-hmm.
They're on their second kicker, so. There's a bunch of stuff that's gone into their 2 losses this year. At the same time, I still think they're a good team. I still think they have a chance to make the Super Bowl this year. Can anyone really predict what's going on in the NFL?
No.
This year? I mean the Chiefs almost lost to the Broncos last night. The Steelers are 1-3.
That's why the NFL is great. Because you don't know what's going on. It doesn't get ludicrous like baseball, where the Oakland A's are in the playoffs. But it's an explainable kind of parity where you just so much talent in the league that you do understand why teams go through these ebbs and flows, especially early in the season. With you just mentioned it. You mentioned the young players. new players, chemistry, free agents, all of that. It's why teams can get off to slow starts, like the Vikings have in the past, like you mentioned. Like we've saw, everybody noted the Patriots' poor starts before last week, and
they do that every year.
Yes,
the Patriots do it every year.
Yep.
And then they're in the Super Bowl. So.
That's right. So but the media nowadays, social media, everybody, every week, it's the Super Bowl or fired. It's just, and everybody, of course, wants to be a genius by being the first one to predict either the demise or, of course, a celebration of some sort. Okay, so Cousins, what's the deal with Cousins as far as the media and the fans?
I think people are starting to realize why the Vikings spent so much money on him. I'm pretty sure if I've said this in the past that in that Week 2 game against the Packers, if Case Keenum was out there, I'm pretty sure they wouldn't have been able to come back from 22 points if Kirk Cousins wasn't the quarterback, because Case Keenum is now throwing a 75-yard bomb to Stephon Diggs for a touchdown. And he's had some faults with fumbles or whatever, but their passing offense is the fifth best in the league right now. Yardage wise, I believe they've thrown the most of anyone in the league, which is another story. But I think their Vikings fans are starting to come around. A lot of everyone loved Case Keenum, what he did last year, but the coaching staff and the front office knew that if they wanted to get to a Super Bowl, they needed to improve that position.
Yep.
I think if you look at what Case Keenum is doing or not doing Denver this year, you can see why the Vikings opted to go, and spend so much money on a guy like Kirk Cousins rather than bring Case Keenum back for a little cheaper. So, 4 games, he's still, on a new team in a new offense, still trying to learn, what his receivers' habits are and running backs. So, and even with all that, the factors going against him, he's played, very well. So
yeah, But again, the fans aren't. So nobody's doing anything. Like they're actually in all. They're kind of blaming Zimmer more than Cousins. Then.
Yeah. I would say they're blaming the defense more and Mike Zimmer more than Kirk Cousins, and the lack of, the Vikings haven't run the ball very well this year either. I think they're ranked last in rushing. So.
Well, Cook's not completely healthy, and that's an issue for me. When I hear that Cook's saying, we're hearing he's not 100% healthy with the hamstring, I got to tell you right now, I understand where they are with the team, but I'm not taking any chances. I mean, unless the doctor says he can't actually hurt it anymore, which I don't think that's the case with the hamstring, I'm sitting him. I want him 100%, or I'm not even playing him because I don't want him out for the year. That was part of why they really weren't balanced last year. And now you got Cousins and Cook. Hopefully in the postseason is a much better option than Keenan and Murray. So why take that chance? Yeah, exactly. So why even take that chance? Shouldn't they? I mean, those 2 kids, Rock Thomas and Michael Boone, look pretty good in the preseason. Give them some snaps and then sit Cook for a game or 2. I'm not saying they're going to be Dalvin Cook, but I mean, you give them a shot for a game or 2.
Yeah, I totally agree. I've been kind of skeptical of the way the Vikings have actually been using Dalvin Cook this season so far. They've pretty much just picked up where he left off last year and had him on the field for pretty much most of the game. And a guy coming off a torn ACL, I think it probably would have been better just to maybe ease his workload in as the season progressed, but and trying to avoid injury. But that hasn't happened, and look where they are now. He's dealing with a hamstring injury, probably because he has been doing too much since he came back. But yeah, they have. Those Mike Boone and Rock Thomas, they did look good in the preseason, but for some reason, John DeFilippo, if the team gets down at any point this year, just the running game has not been what he's looked to turn to. I think the lack of success on the offensive line has had a bunch to do with that. But at the same time, I think Mike Zimmer's teams, at least with the Vikings, he's been a guy that likes to control the clock with the run game and then, play good defense. And I thought, that's what the Vikings would be doing this year, and just asking Kirk Cousins to, make a couple good throws a game, in the red zone and things like that. But that hasn't really been the case. It's just been the Kirk Cousins show and no running game.
All right. Well, we'll talk more about this then for sure sometime in the next month or so when things are definitely going a lot better for the Vikings. And I have confidence they will. Maybe they even get a win this week against Philly. So I can see that happening. And we'll and again, it'll be interesting to talk to you again when and I'll get I'll get all the information from you regarding how the fans and the media are treating Zimmer Zimmer especially at that point when things are going well. So I like to try to remind the media, when they stick their foot in their mouth about certain things, like trying to fire the coach or put him on the hot seat when it's just ridiculous. So hopefully you'll do that for me there in Minnesota. So
I'll do my best.
Yes, and you do a great job. So I appreciate it, Adam. We look forward to, again, talking to you later on down the road, and we'll check out all your Viking coverage at thevikingage.com at Fansided.
All right, sounds good. Thanks for having me on.
You got it. Thanks, Adam. All right, that is Adam Patrick, and that is some Vikings talk here on the OFN Today. All right, so Scott's coming on here in the next minute, and we'll talk some fantasy, and then Dave Cokin is next. And, Dave Cokin is probably going to be here in about a half hour, 45 minutes. And then we'll talk about everything else that went on this weekend, because there was an awful lot that happened this weekend that I did not touch up on in college football and the NFL. Just a lot. I mean, it was a big weekend, especially in college. You had that big Ohio State win against Penn State. I don't know what James Franklin was thinking. I don't know what Dino Babers was thinking. He has 3 timeouts. His defense is falling apart, and Clemson's moving the ball down the field. 2 minutes to go, 1:30 to go, 1 minute to go, and they're inside the 20, inside the 10, inside the 5. He holds on to his 3 timeouts, and Clemson scores with like 40 seconds to go in the game. What on earth in college, when they stop the ball at a first down, do you need all 3 of your timeouts in that spot? Especially if you hold them to a field goal, you can actually go to overtime if you slow the game down and give your defense an opportunity to suck it up. So I don't know what he was thinking, but we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll update injuries, key injuries, and a lot more, and early look at the big games this week in the NFL and college football. So that's coming up a little bit later on with Dave Cokin from Covers.com. But let's talk some fantasy football now. As we do each week here, we take a look at some of the top waiver ads of the week with Scott Engel, the managing director for RotoExperts.com. Scott, good talking to you again.
Always a pleasure, my friend. And the first thing I have to say is, after watching Patrick Mahomes last night, I have a new nickname for him. I'm going to call him Russell Roethlisberger, because he reminds me of a fusion of Russell Wilson and Ben Roethlisberger.
No Brett Favre, then. You're not going for the Favre thing.
No, he isn't.
Okay.
I don't think he's been intercepted yet.
All right, I get that. All right, interesting nickname. And look, the left-handed pass was awesome. He's a fun player, and I think what is really good for the NFL is that in just a couple of years ago, or even just last year, before Baker Mayfield and Patrick Mahomes, I talked about this last week on another show. It was like spread offenses in the NFL that converted into good quarterbacks. I mean, from college to the NFL, like 0%. And in just one season, we now have Baker Mayfield, who everybody can see is going to be a really good quarterback. And, of course, Patrick Mahomes, who basically ran the same system, almost like, the closest thing to a run and shoot in college. And that's great, because so many quarterbacks are running that now in college, and that gives you a better feeling that if they do end up in the right spot, which Patrick Mahomes certainly did with Andy Reid, he hit the mother load there, then we'll get better quarterback play in the NFL.
Yeah, and for fantasy purposes, right now when I do my in-season rankings later today on RotoExperts.com for right now in the near future, Mahomes could be the number one quarterback in fantasy football. It's hard to make a debate against it. The guy's throwing at least 3 touchdown passes every week. He's also running the ball in frequently. But I think people have to take caution, though, in what they're doing fantasy-wise. Don't trade a top-level running back to get a number one quarterback. Quarterback is deep.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, Patrick Mahomes can be that special, like what Deshaun Watson was looking before the injury last year. But yeah, like you said, there's it's like that's what I love about like in fantasy. You can get guys like I was able to draft Watson and still get Phillip Rivers. So that's what's great about fantasy quarterbacks is that if you could still get good backup quarterbacks in fantasy in case you have any injuries and like you said though it's very hard. Like I have even this season. I have so much depth at receiver, but it's so hard to try to find a running back. It's like where are all these great running backs? It's not so easy, and nobody none of the other owners want to give up any running backs because there's just not enough of them to go around.
Yeah, if you don't have one of, let's say, the top 6 or 7 running backs, you're really scrambling at the other positions.
Yeah, I played Tevin Coleman for the second or third straight week, and that's it. I've had enough. I have Aaron Jones. He's getting into the starting lineup, and as long as he's healthy, he's versus Tevin Coleman. I'm not. I've had enough of Tevin Coleman. They're not doing anything.
I don't think you should be going to Green Bay to look for running backs. That's a pass-first team. It's going to be a committee there. I wouldn't trust Aaron Jones. At least Coleman is going to get some goal line opportunities, and Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, like last week.
Aaron Rodgers is always going to throw near the goal line.
Yeah, well, that was the problem. I mean, how sickening is it when you have Tevin Coleman and Freeman's out, because Freeman usually always gets the goal line carries, and Coleman will get a few. But then all of a sudden, you got Coleman as your number one, and they bring Ito Smith in, and Ito Smith gets the touchdown on the ground. I'm like, are you freaking kidding me?
Better, but I still think Coleman, is going to get his chances and scoring opportunities. I'd pull the reins back on Aaron Jones. Waiver wire-wise, I think you may want to pick up Ty Montgomery with all the injuries in the Green Bay wide receiver core. He's caught 8 passes for something like 105 yards in the last 2 games. Mm-hmm. And with all the injuries at wide receiver, Aaron Rodgers is going to start looking to him because the guy is a former wide receiver.
Yeah, we'll start with that because it was about time. I don't remember what down it was. Montgomery was lined up in the backfield. And I don't. It didn't necessarily look like it was the number one option. It looked like Rodgers looked down the field. It wasn't like I'm going to fake it and go to Montgomery. But I think he did look for his first option. It wasn't there. And then the rush was coming. And there's Montgomery sneaking out of the backfield. And whatever, a linebacker on him, beautiful, picked up 20 yards or so, 30 yards. That, I'm telling you, this is the problem with Mike McCarthy and what Aaron Rodgers said in the press conference. I mean, come on. This is it. If the Packers don't go anywhere this year, McCarthy's gone. This is the problem. You got a guy like Ty Montgomery. You should be putting Ty Montgomery in that backfield with Aaron Jones, with Jamal Williams. Put a linebacker on Ty Montgomery. He can do everything because the defense will have to prepare for him to either run the ball or be a receiver. He's a much better receiver, by the way. But you got to get him out in coverage and force the opposition to cover him with a linebacker. And why McCarthy doesn't come up with more plays like that just shows you he's limited in the creative department.
Yeah, play calling is a real issue, with some coordinators, and sometimes coordinators and coaches don't fit the schemes to their talent. They try to force the talent, the schemes onto their talent. I think that's a problem in Seattle too. Brian Schottenheimer has always been a vanilla ho-hum play caller, and I think he's really hurting the situation in Seattle too, both from a real football and a fantasy perspective.
Well, the first thing you got to do, though, is you got Baldwin back last week, and then they look. The deal in Seattle, as you know, though, is I think Pete Carroll wants the offense to kind of be boring now. He wants to run the football. Now, they didn't do it properly against Chicago, but they have seemed to pick that up, especially last week. They ran the ball pretty well, even though Mike Davis had to come in, and he's one of your guys this week, and that's like one of my favorite guys on the waiver wire this week completely because you can't count on the health status of those Seattle running backs or the rookie, and Davis, when he gets in there, as long as he's healthy, is productive.
Yeah, I'd pull back a little bit on Davis. He's not my favorite waiver wire opportunity. I like him in the short term. He was a surprise starter. I actually plugged Penny in one of my leagues as a late swap, and it didn't work out. But Chris Carson has had a lot of trouble staying healthy.
Mm-hmm.
They obviously don't trust Penny right now. It's the same situation starting to look like Ronald Jones in Tampa Bay. So I like him as a short-term solution, I would say. But his touches can get scaled back at any time. Yeah, they're running the ball, but when they go to the air, they have three problems right now. The pass blocking is not as good as the run blocking. DJ Fluker's more of a run blocker.
Sure.
They lack depth at wide receiver right now, and Baldwin is not 100%. He's got problems in both of his knees, and the play calling is bad to the point where, in the Chicago game, Wilson was changing the plays at the line of scrimmage, and they actually had to call a timeout because the coaching staff was like, "What's going on?"
See, I will have to, being a Jet fan and going through a lot of, and I talked about this before on the show about the media, especially the writers and especially the ones in New York. What'll happen is the media will rip apart a coach or a player or whatever. A lot of times, the average fan who relies on the media to, for their expertise. And then because the media, a lot of them don't know what they're talking about, they wind up, oh, yeah, you're right. And then all of a sudden somebody gets somebody gets a bad rap. Now, I'm not trying to sit here and tell you that Brian Schottenheimer is a great coordinator because he hasn't proven it yet. I also know Brian Schottenheimer's never had a quarterback like Russell Wilson. But I always try to remind everybody that as much as they used to rip Brian Schottenheimer when he was with the Jets, try and remember – he was the coordinator back-to-back years, championship games with a first- and second-year quarterback and the best running game in the NFL. And that's something. So to trash him the way the media trashed him like he was garbage, when you do and accomplish that, I'm sorry, it's just not that bad. And then you go to the Rams with their terrible quarterback situation. Everywhere he's been, he's had bad quarterbacks. So I'm willing to give him a shot here to see how, because there ain't no excuse if you can't do something. Even though, again, we know there are some limitations with the personnel in Seattle besides Russell Wilson. But the point is that sometimes guys aren't as bad as the media leads on, and I think that it's going to be a work in progress. It's new to the whole. It's new to Russell Wilson. As having Bevel there for all those years, it's a completely different offense, and we'll see what happens by the end of the year. And if it doesn't work, then I guess you can bring somebody else in. But I just wanted to throw that out there because I know a lot of people trash Schottenheimer, and the reason they trash him is because the media has trashed him for years.
Well, I'm not going to overlook what you said, about the AFC Championship games that that the Jets went to, and that he was a part of that. I'm not going to take that away, but since then, he hasn't had much of a track record of success, and I came with it. When he was hired, I wasn't thrilled with it, but I did it with an open mind, and I just think it's kind of like Mike Martz. He with the run and shoot, with the Rams, he was great. But then when he went everywhere else, he tried to force his schemes on the players instead of adjusting to their talents or their strengths, and he was never had success again. So it might be that with Schottenheimer, you don't take credit away, for what he accomplished with the Jets, but I don't think what he's doing everywhere else is fitting.
Yeah, I think, and that's a good point because I think what happens sometimes, especially with coordinators, it is a lot easier. Like when he was with the Jets, he was there for so long. Ryan inherited him. And it's a lot easier for a coordinator to go with a head coaching staff to a new, say, regime and rebuild a team from scratch so the coordinator and the coaching staff and the GM can all have a take on what fits the coordinators and their schemes. But when any coordinator goes to a team like Seattle where they're used to a completely different scheme, different players fitting those schemes, and a quarterback that's used to a completely different, coordinator, that is sometimes that's going to be an iffy proposition, and a lot of times it ain't going to work. And a lot of times it is going to take, a long time during the season to find out whether it does work. Tell me a little bit about whether or not a guy like, David Moore, because I don't know who he is. A lot of people don't know who this guy is. Apparently, he made a play last week. Apparently he's looked good in practice from what they said. So, you're a Seattle fan.
Yeah, David Moore is actually owned in 0.0% of ESPN leagues. And Pete Carroll already came out and said that Brandon Marshall snaps are going to be cut back, and you're going to see more and more
Good.
who actually showed a lot of flashes, especially this preseason. He's got downfield gears. He's got some big playability. Caught both of his targets for 39 yards last week, and they need somebody to step up in the passing game here. So they're going to give Moore an opportunity. So you got to give him a flyer, or at least put him on your watch list.
All right, let's move on and talk about. We'll stay with the receivers for a second and speak. Deshaun Watson, who is we were just talking about Mahomes, and again Watson gets off to this great start last year, gets injured. So I think maybe too much was expected of him, especially early on. Once again, he's got to get into the rhythm, terrible offensive line and all of that. And I was actually thinking about after week 2, I was actually starting to say to myself, I'm like on an every week kind of thing now, whether or not I need to put Phillip Rivers there instead of Watson. And then I said, I need to be patient. Because no matter what, and like we saw against the game against the Giants, even when the offense doesn't look good for whatever 3 quarters, he still put up a ton of points because of what they had to do to come back, and that's the type of quarterback he is as well. And he has a big game this week, and part of the reason he had a big game this week, even with Fuller going down, was because of this kid, Cutie, the receiver from Texas Tech. Those receivers sometimes never really amount to anything because it's part of the system that we just talked about, but he had a big game.
Yeah, he did. 11 catches was a modern NFL tied a modern NFL record for receptions by a player in his pro debut. And
wow.
Will Fuller, they're saying that maybe not. Bill O'Brien alluded to maybe it wasn't a recurrence of the hamstring injury that led him to pull him in the second half. Will Fuller's been terrific with Deshaun Watson. In all of 7 games he's played with Deshaun Watson, he's scored a touchdown in every game. Is at 10 total. But he's very injury-prone, so here's an opportunity for QT to step up. But you have to remember he's a rookie. They didn't prepare for him last week. Now they'll see film on him, so it becomes a little tougher. But you at least got to take a flyer if you need wide receiver help.
Yeah, some other wide receivers that I know you're looking at this week. I know one of them's Chester Rogers. So talk a little bit about the difference that you believe is between Chester Rogers and then the other receivers with the Colts, Ryan Grant and Pascal, because Pascal had himself a heck of a game. Now, sometimes that's why it's always important, to, as we all know, if you're doing this long enough in fantasy, you don't just look at it, guy scores a touchdown, like Pascal did, but you'd look at the targets, especially. And, of course, percentage of receptions is important too. But he had 10 targets and 6 receptions, so that means something. So, but Rodgers has been there a little bit longer. Tell me a little about the differences between the 3 and if Rodgers is the guy that you would go with out of those 3.
Well, I hate to use this term, but I can't think of anything better about Ryan Grant to say that he's a jag, that he's just a guy. He seems to be more of a locker room glue guy and, a run blocker than anything, and he's never going to make any fantasy contributions. Chester Rogers really stepped up. Andrew Luck has some familiarity with him, and they're playing on a short week against the Patriots, and T.Y. Hilton might be out, and he might have to step forward as this number 1 wide receiver. And this other kid, that we were talking about here, it's he was cut in the summer by another team and really was a surprise. And I don't know how much you can count on him. If I were to pick up one of these 3 guys, it's going to be Chester Rogers.
All right. Another receiver that you have your eye on is Willie Snead. Matter of fact, I think last week or the week before we were talking about John Brown, and of course John Brown had himself a nice game against the Steelers. So if you're looking, I guess this is and most of these guys are depth guys because Willie Snead has some limitations. To me, he's a guy that you're probably looking at. Tell me if I'm right or wrong. As a guy, okay, if I need to plug and place a guy because of a bye or whatever the case. Willie Snead at this point you're thinking is somebody to keep an eye on. And I'm not sure people would have thought that coming from Drew Brees to Joe Flacco.
Yeah, with Willie Snead, it's it's a situation where he scored double-figure PPR points in 3 of 4 games. And, this offense is rejuvenated in the passing game. You see Joe Flacco throw for 300 yards. Snead is really good as a bye-week filler, I think, but you can't expect him to get in the end zone a lot.
Other receivers wide receivers I wanted to go over with you. And you see these 3 guys who have breakout type of potential, game-breaking type of potential, but guys that, forget it in a PPR league, but guys that, like Ross last week, he's one of them, kind of been waiting for him to have that big reception, and he finally did. But still, it's not like they're targeting him enough. And that's an issue. But then again, Boyd is starting to break out. So all of a sudden, he's definitely got to be a reliable guy now. And then you've got Martavis Bryant, who was always an interesting guy that you always wondered, okay, do I start him this week? Do I not? When the last few years at Pittsburgh, but you were always frustrated by him. And then just look at what happens in this game with the Raiders. He's wide open. Okay, Carter throws him just a little bit, but he's got to come down with that. And if he does, Bryant's stats this week, fantasy-wise, jump up that much bigger. Patterson has a big week, another game-breaker type, but another guy that doesn't get a whole lot of targets. I think he had 5 this week. That tied him with the 5 he had with the Jags. I just wonder whether or not, with the fact that nobody's really breaking out in New England with a receiver, and if Edelman comes back, is that actually a good thing for Patterson? Does that make things a little bit more open, as far a little bit deeper, so they're not just throwing screen passes to Patterson, which is pretty much what they've been doing right now? Because if that's all you're going to do, he's kind of worthless. So. If you had to think about any of those 3 guys, I know that do you completely dismiss all of them because none of them get enough targets?
So we're talking Patterson, Bryan, and who's the third?
John Ross.
John Ross is too boom or bust, but if I had to take anybody on a bye week, I would take him, as much passing volume as we're seeing.
Okay.
The other 2 are completely fantasy irrelevant. Cordarrelle Patterson had a chance to step up with Julian Edelman out, Chris Hogan not playing well. Now Edelman will come back. They've signed Josh Gordon. Cordarrelle Patterson was a guy after his rookie year was getting drafted in the 3rd round. And
sure.
In fantasy drafts, he was a bust. He's been irrelevant ever since. Martavis Bryant, the guy who gets you 30, 40 yards every week, maybe on 2-3 catches. He's fantasy irrelevant too. These guys are completely left on the free agent list. They have no fantasy appeal whatsoever.
Which guy, if you had to think about a guy that you, if somebody were to tell you that one of these guys overperformed this year, based on your metrics, which guy would you imagine that would be?
I would only throw John Ross in there.
Okay.
That's it.
All right, let's talk about the Chiefs, because Watkins is dealing with a hamstring injury, and they like to throw the ball around all over the place. We talked about DeMarcus Robinson before, so would you give any consideration at all if you were, let's say you had Watkins on your fantasy team, and you were thinking of, okay, maybe I have room for somebody just in case, and I rely on, maybe Watkins is important to me for whatever reason. Would you consider either DeMarcus Robinson or Chris Conley?
No. Both of these guys are secondary targets. If Watkins is out, maybe we're throwing more to Demetrius Harris. There's a splitting it between the 2. These guys have never been fantasy relevant. They never will be fantasy relevant. They're secondary targets. I've seen 20-team leagues where these guys are not owned. If you're gonna go deep for a wide receiver, I might go, rather for like a Marquez of Valdez. What's his name in Green Bay? Marquez Valdez.
Scantling.
Starling, I think it is.
Scantling.
It's slipping me. I'd rather take a crack on that, because maybe he gets a chance to start for them and he's flashed in the preseason. Or David Moore. These guys have no fantasy relevance.
What about Jordan
whatsoever.
Matthews? What about Matthews? He has, he comes back to Philly. He has a big catch. It is Carson Wentz. He's a different quarterback. I haven't looked at the numbers. I don't know what Matthews does when Wentz is out there compared to Foles, even though Wentz was there most of the last season. Is he somebody that's worth at least, hey, you know what, I'm going to put him on my scout team to keep an eye on him?
Yeah, maybe put him on the watch list, but, he had a big 50-plus touchdown reception. Him and Wentz are good friends, but, the guy's bounced around the league, and at best he's the fourth target in that passing game. Not somebody you want to put in your lineup. Maybe somebody when you're playing DFS and the matchup is right, you think of him as a punt play, but that's about it.
I know we talked a lot about Disley after the big week he had on the opening day. What about now that he's out for a little bit, or he's out for the year now? So can you look at Vanett and say, okay, well, if Disley can do what Disley did, well, can Vanett kind of replace that?
Yeah, I don't see that at all. I don't even think he's a top 35 tight end. More of a blocker than a pass receiver.
What about Ed Dixon? Would you keep an eye on him when he comes back in a couple of weeks?
I might. That's interesting. But there's no timetable for his return, so it's not something that I'm consciously entertaining. Right now with bye weeks and injuries, a lot of people don't have room to stash an Ed Dixon on their team.
Sure.
They just don't have the
just
roster
another guy to put
right
on
now.
Your watch list, though. Just another guy to keep an eye on, just in case. Because sometimes we all forget these guys, especially when they haven't played all season and they're not stars. And it's good to kind of just, hey, you know what? Just put this guy on your watch list. He's going to come off the injury list. You obviously wait till he plays a game, and then at least maybe you'll get a leg up. Or hey, if you want to take a chance before he plays his first game. What about Brait? Now that Howard's out for a couple of years, no comparison, right?
Oh yeah, you got to like him. He caught 8 touchdowns from Jameis Winston last year, and already caught a touchdown last week when Howard went down. So this he's back in tight end 1 territory with the quarterback change and the O.J. Howard injury. But it could be a month window because O.J. Howard was really starting to come on.
And, of course, the big difference, though, is Howard is a tremendous athlete for the position, and he can kind of be your 80-yard tight end. Brait seems to be more of a guy, like you said, with the touchdowns that you can kind of rely on in that area, especially now that Winston's back. So that might help him as well. Speaking of tight ends, what about Tyler Kroft? I mean, I'm not really high on Kroft myself. I know he's taking over for Eifert. Matter of fact, he was out there last week, and then he couldn't catch the ball, and it got tipped off his hands, and Atlanta picked it off. That's just, you feel sorry for Eifert because you look at it and you got to be like, well, that could have happened to anybody. I mean, that was a really bad injury, but when it happens to the same guy, nobody's going to think that. They're just going to go, oh, him again.
I think Tyler Kroft is a real thing, and there's going to be a lot of competition for him on the waiver wire because the guy caught 7 touchdowns last year when Eifert was out. And look, Andy Dalton loves to throw to his tight end, so I think that's a real thing. In case he doesn't do well, though, stash away the name C.J. Uzomah.
Who would you go with, Kroft or Brait?
That's tough, but I would probably say Brait.
Now, Nick Chubb has only 10 rushing attempts all season, and you would think, well, why would I even consider him? Unless, of course, you've got Carlos Hyde and Chubb's your backup. That makes a lot of sense. But Chubb, I'm sure Chubb was probably available in leagues before this past week because he only had 7 attempts all season. But then he has 3 attempts against the Raiders for 105 yards, 2 touchdowns. So if he is out there on the waiver wire, is he a no-brainer pickup?
I would say he's a no-brainer. You can't overreact to 3 carries for 105 yards because obviously that's not sustainable. But I think you have to pick him up because Carlos Hyde has a very checkered injury history, and he can be pushed into a prime role at any time.
A couple of other running backs you like, Robert Turbin and Alfred Blue. Why do you have your eye on those guys?
Turbin returning from a suspension. The Colts have the 29th ranked rushing game right now. And, this is a veteran. You saw him starting in the preseason. He had 7 touchdown runs 2 years ago. He's not going to be a star, but he could be that best ball carrier. And Alfred Blue, Lamar Miller's just been terrible lately. And, the Texans have always liked Alfred Blue. It's obvious. And Alfred Blue played the entire fourth quarter in the last game. You might be seeing a shift here.
Okay. Yeah, I took Lamar Miller a couple of years ago, and I said to myself, I ain't taking him anymore. He's got to be one of the most overrated running backs in football, especially for the money he's making. What about if with the Leonard Fournette situation? Look, this is not a surprise. I've been saying this since before he was drafted to watch out for Leonard Fournette because of his injury. As a matter of fact, there was some talk at the time, should the Jets go after Fournette? And on the Jet shows, I was like, nope, stay away from this guy, not this high. Jags took him. I think he's a perfect fit for the Jags, don't get me wrong. But I said this the last couple of years or last year, the Jags need to go out and get another guy. It's because you can't count on him. He's a head case, and he deals with injuries. Now, Yeldon's a nice backup, but I'm talking long-term. If anything happens to Fournette, he's out for the year. I'm not so sure Yeldon is somebody you can completely count on. So would you, would you only consider Corey Grant as a watch list guy if anything were to happen to Fournette long-term? Is that somebody where if you have Yeldon as Fournette's backup, you simply go, okay, now Grant moves in and he's the definite backup for Yeldon?
The opportunity doesn't always lead to production. We saw Fournette out 2 weeks ago, and Yeldon was trying to play through an ankle injury. They gave Corey Grant some work, and he's a scat back who really can't do anything with it. I don't think he could step forward and play any sort of prime role here.
And then quarterback, let's say you're looking for a backup. You have a backup issue. You need a backup, and you're looking at a couple of guys, Mitch Trubisky and Derek Carr. Do you see a big difference between the two?
Trubisky's going to be up and down. It really depends on the opposition. With Carr, there's no rhyme or reason. He's like a poor man's Andy Dalton. I'd rather pick up Jameis Winston because with no running game and no defense and them playing from behind a lot, and the wide receivers and pass catchers that they have, game flow is going to be in his favor a lot.
All right. That pretty much wraps it up. By the way, Earl Thomas now out for the year. So how big does that impact Seattle's defense?
Yeah, I think it's a huge impact. He was playing great football, before he got injured. The one thing that he feared and why he wanted an extension. And now this defense, Bradley McDougall's playing well, and so is Shaq Griffin. But that secondary without Thomas, we've seen it even when 2 years ago, when they still had Sherman there and Thomas was gone. They just got torched down the stretch in 2016 and in the playoffs. So it's a big difference. It's a big fall off from, say, him to Tedrick Thompson. And, as far as him flipping off the sideline, when he came back from the holdout, just my take on it really quickly, he said, I'm coming back for the fans, the city, and my teammates. I think that was directed towards somebody specific in the organization, not the entire sideline.
All right, sounds good. And I know what the answer is. This is going to be, but I'm just going to throw it out there because I don't know if you have any opinion on him as a young player. But with, of course, San Francisco is like a few other teams right now with no Garoppolo. I'm sure you don't touch anybody or pretty much anybody. But with Goodwin and Pettis injured, do you think this kid Bourne, from what you've seen, is he somebody to just keep an eye on?
Definitely, because C.J. Beathard might have been working with him in practices and on scout teams and, may have developed a comfort level with him.
Good point.
So a lot of times when a backup quarterback comes in, you have to watch for who he really goes to. There might have been somebody who's been working with in practices, et cetera.
All right, Scott, appreciate it as always. Once again, exclusive Edge in-season fantasy football package is available, and the promo code is TheKing. For the special discount here. And then, of course, you can join the live 24/7 expert chat room. And how often are you on that chat room?
Every day.
It's 24/7? Is that you? You just never sleep, right?
Well, if I'm not there, somebody else on the Roto Experts team is.
All right. Excellent. Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you next Tuesday.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
All right. That's Scott Engel from rotoexperts.com. And he is with us every Tuesday. That makes sense, right? All right. So anyway, and by the way, I think from time to time, well, look, all fantasy leagues are different. I know in my league, we have to get our picks in. I think we have to get our picks in by Tuesday night. I'm pretty sure. In some leagues, you don't have to get them in till Wednesday. So, but we just decided, of course, this would be the better day to do it. We get it out there in advance in case anybody, of course, does have to get their picks in by Tuesday night. I think I have to get my picks in by Tuesday night. I mean, I just always do anyway, but I don't know. I guess I have to think about it. Another player I think people should keep an eye on is Curtis Samuel. Now, I wouldn't pick him up, of course, because he's coming off a health issue. But I would keep. Remember, I was saying at the Open, I would keep an eye on certain young players, and he is definitely somebody that I would keep an eye on. He very talented, very fast player from college at Ohio State. Drafted high, had injuries, and now he's got the health problem. But he had a solid preseason, and new coordinator. Cam Newton's looking good. Even though the kid Moore, the wide receiver, the top receiver that they drafted, hasn't really produced much. I'm kind of a little bit surprised about that. Maybe with the bye week, we'll see him a little bit more. He could be even somebody I would definitely just watch him, just in case. Because look, Carolina just doesn't have a whole lot of depth at the receiver position. So when I take a look at Carolina's receivers, and I know Funchess is going to get a lot of targets, and that's just the way it is there. But for number one receiver, I mean, come on, Devin Funchess. So I mean, Torrey Smith, he ain't no starter. I mean, Torrey Smith's a number 3-4 receiver. That's all he is. DJ Moore has got to get more reps. He's got to get starter reps. There must be something going on there with his development that he is not getting more reps, so he has to get more reps. But let's just say DJ Moore has not developed as fast as they'd like. And then you've got Torrey Smith with Greg Olsen out. Where else are the passes going? They can't all go to Devin Funchess, so keep an eye on Curtis Samuel, the running back / receiver, jack of all trades kind of receiver there for Carolina. And I just think that when it is time for him to return, you just got to watch. Now, hopefully what will happen is he goes out, you watch the game, he makes some plays, he gets some targets, and then at that point, we'll talk about it with Scott. Then I'll bring it up with Scott, and I'll stick my neck out if I like what I see and say, this is a guy you pick up. Now, who knows? I don't know whether Scott will have that idea as well, but I would debate it. But he's got to get out there and play. He's got to be healthy, and he's got to prove it. Preseason's one thing, regular season's the other. So anyway, that's a player that I would definitely keep an eye on. Other injuries of note to pass along, D. Ford, groin injury last night. Now, look, I remember watching him this season with Houston, making some plays and going, wow, just look at how much better Kansas City's defense can be, or at least their pass rush can be, when D. Ford gets an opportunity to rush the passer along with Justin Houston. I mean, because that's not a very good defense. I mean, the thing with Kansas City's defense is funny. Fuller, who they got in the Alex Smith trade, had a real good year last year. He's a good player, but as you can see from last night's game, hands of stone. Then you've got Jones up front. You have Houston and Ford. Berry isn't playing right now. But the point I'm trying to make here is you've got three really good players, talents, in Ford, Houston, and Jones. And yet, and Fuller's not bad, and yet the defense is terrible. So now with Ford dealing with a groin, and this guy can't stay healthy, that's just not good for the Chiefs. I mean, Berry, they need Berry back. And I think they're doing the right thing, obviously. They haven't lost a game yet, so why in the world would you rush Eric Berry? So, but they got to get Berry return at some point this season, get that, and hopefully keep Ford healthy. I mean, right now, I'd sit Ford for the next 2 or 3 games, even if it was just a mild groin issue. I mean, I ain't taking any chances with him either. Because if the Chiefs are really going to win a Super Bowl, and that's what they're trying to contend for, of course, they've got to get all of those star players on the field in the postseason. Because if they don't have Berry and they don't have Ford with Houston and Jones, They are not. I'm sorry, but this is not the Rams who won their Super Bowl and barely won their Super Bowl. Just remember that. Barely won their Super Bowl. Okay? So this is because that Ram defense was okay. It was middle of the pack. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't like this Chiefs defense. They were like, average. They were like between 15 and 20 in the league. And that's all they had to be because the Ram offense was like, once in a generation. So even if you say that this Chief offense is spectacular, which it has been so far, you got to play a little bit of defense in the postseason. You just have to. And if the Chiefs are not going to play any defense, if they lose any of these guys, forget it. So don't get too carried away with the Chiefs as far as a Super Bowl team just yet. All right, so speaking of the Chiefs in Denver, let's talk about that with Dave Cokin from Covers.com. And we've got a lot of other things to go over, Dave. So fun game to watch last night. Broncos looked real good at least early enough defensively that they were starting to look like the defense we expected when the season began. And then all of a sudden, Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs turned it on when winning teams are supposed to turn it on. And we got a taste of what we've seen most of the season from both of these teams, with the Chiefs winning and the Broncos defense faltering once again.
Yeah, although I don't put much of it on the Denver defense because he made some otherworldly plays in that last drive. Now, granted, one of them came after the play clock went to 0, which Bronco fans have a right. They have a right to be upset about that. I mean, you can't miss that call.
Yeah,
that's as easy as it gets. And I don't know why there's not a replay system in place for that. I mean,
yeah.
That's something that should be challenged, and that play should not have counted. But nevertheless, you can't take away from what Mahomes did, including the play where he threw the ball left-handed. I mean, this guy's just got instincts that are almost inexplicable for a guy this inexperienced, and he really is something to watch. He's legit. I mean, he's absolutely legit. This is not some kind of a fluke.
No, I mean, he's a very talented kid. He's not the best thing since I don't know, Johnny Unitas, or you would throw a number of names out there, but he's a very exciting, talented kid. He's going to be it's great for the league. He's going to be around for a long time, and it's going to be fun to watch him. But again, as usual, and I'm sure people who have backed them all season will go crazy today after what happened. But I think what you also have to see is what happened early on in the game. And just like any young quarterback, if you can apply pressure, if you've got a really good top defense. And I just right now, Denver, all you got to do is take a look at Denver's point totals. And they're just giving up too many points right now every week. Even against the Raiders, when they didn't give up a whole lot of points, Carr was like 90% completion percentage. So the defense, I expect more. Let's just put it that way from the Denver defense. I don't think we're getting anywhere near the type of defense that they had when they won the Super Bowl a few years ago. And I think they need to have that type of defense if they are going to be a playoff team. They're just not getting it. But as far as Mahomes is concerned, I just think that we have to wait until the weather turns. We have to wait until, of course, he starts playing better defenses. And let's see what happens. Again, he's going to be a great player in this league. I just think that so many other people, of course, want to anoint him as the best thing ever right now.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm not going to put him in the Hall of Fame just yet. But through 4 weeks, he's the MVP.
Oh, yes. I would agree with that. Sure. He's and that's what's great about the NFL, though. Super Bowls are not won or lost in September or October 1st.
I've got a ticket on Goff to win the MVP, so I kind of hope Mahomes cools off a little bit.
Well, what's the Goff number?
I don't know what it is now, but I got it at 30, 35,
really?
36, like that.
30-ish to 1 for Goff to be the MVP. That's a great deal.
Well, the funny thing is, I didn't get the best price in the Rams because there was 15 and 16 out there early, but I got 10 in mid-August, and they're 9-5 now. So I'm not too unhappy with my position as far as that goes.
No, not at all. I mean, last week they were even, just slightly under 4-1, and I thought that was a bargain.
I had my futures report, and I went ahead and threw. Now, it wasn't my own personal money, but if it was my own personal money, I would have done it. And I put 1,000 on my futures report on the Rams last week, because even 3 or 4 to 1 in my mind is worth it. It just is. I mean, they're playing too good right now, and I think you take a look at the rest of the NFC, and sure, I think Minnesota is going to be better, but
I don't know. You know what? I don't know if they are going to be better. Something isn't right there. And it's tough to put your finger on it, because obviously Mike Zimmer can't put his finger on it right now. But something isn't right with that football team, and I just can't identify exactly what it is.
Well, that's why I had Adam Patrick on earlier on the show, and Adam is the writer for the VikingAge.com and Fansided, and he gave a very logical explanation of a lot of factors that have come into play, especially having Everson Griffin not on the team is huge. You know, their number one pass rusher. That's big. You know, there are the obvious communication issues in the secondary. You know, Terrence Newman is no longer there. They've got a rookie out there in his place. So that's going to happen. It's the NFL. It's going to happen in September. We're going to see that kind of miscommunication. And a few other factors as well. But look, the offense looks fine. It's the defense, and I think the defense will be fine, you know, once they start, especially getting Griffin back. And we'll find out this week. I mean, it's a big game against the Eagles. Eagles are what, a 3-point favorite in that game. And I got to tell you, I mean, I know it's one of those games you probably wind up staying away from. I don't know if there are going to be any angles on the game, but I actually think the Vikings, if I'm taking one of those two teams, I might actually take the Vikings, to tell you the truth. I'm starting to wonder whether the Eagles are going to have one of those Super Bowl hangovers.
It kind of looks like they're having one, because they're just not as sharp as they were last season, and that's a rather obvious statement. I'm not exactly quoting a revelation there. But this is a game where if you circled this before the season started, it's like, wow, this is a huge game, maybe an NFC title preview. And instead, it's a game where, from the Vikings standpoint, not so much from the Eagles, because the Eagles are still, boy, they're in a weak division. And Philadelphia, I'm not going to say they can afford losses more than Minnesota. The Vikings are in real trouble with another loss here, because I'm not so sure the Bears are going away anytime soon. That defense is ridiculously good. And, you know, the Packers aren't a great football team, but they're going to be good enough to hang around. And the Lions are, I don't know what to make of the Lions. I think they're better than the 1-3. I don't think they're a great team by any means, but, you know, I can see them being around 500. The Vikings better stop losing games.
Well, I mean, their schedule, it opens up nicely. They're playing, I mean, obviously after this week, it ain't going to be easy, and they got the Saints as well in the next 5 weeks. But as Adam said, there's 3 other games that are extremely winnable, and they'll be favored in. So I think they'll actually come out of this between 3-2 and 4-1 in their next 5, and I still think they're the team to beat in the NFC North. But we'll see. But yeah, it's still probably a 2-team race. I'm not sold at all with Chicago or Mitch Trubisky's 6 touchdowns. I mean, talk about an angle that really fit perfectly, where the Bucs coming off Monday night, a tough, close loss, you know, just first loss of the season and all that other stuff, from home to the road. With Ryan Fitzpatrick, the turnover machine, the inconsistent Ryan Fitzpatrick. Finally, you were over-expecting his bad game was going to come, especially with the Bears and their defense. It was a terrible matchup, and that's exactly what happened.
Oh, no question about it. And look, Tampa's no good. If ever there was a 2-0 mirage out there, it was the Bucs. They're a last-place team. Their defense is terrible. I think their offense is really limited. I don't like either one of their quarterbacks. Fitzpatrick had a nice little run, but is back to being himself. And Winston, I didn't think Winston. His stats looked okay, but he was playing in 30 minutes of garbage time.
Yeah.
I don't
win games. He needs to win games. Screw the stats. That's what Dirk Cutter is. Dirk Cutter's a stat guy for his offenses and his quarterbacks, and it makes his quarterbacks and his offense look good. But he's a terrible coach. Terrible head coach.
Well, and I think he'll be gone after this year. In fact, if they go into a real slump, he might not even last a year, because the NFL has changed from the old days where they let coaches stick around at the end of the year. They're getting more toward what baseball and basketball and hockey do, which is when it's time to make a change, let's just make a change.
By the way, Vikings-Eagles going to be definitely one of the better games of the week, but you got to, I mean, probably a no-brainer game of the week is going to be the Jags defense against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs offense. And look, we never know what we're going to get week to week from Blake Bortles. I got a kick out of the Jet media bashing the Jets and so forth about Blake Bortles, and I'll talk about this on the next Jet show because, why don't you just compare Blake Bortles' stats this week to Blake Bortles' or against the Jets to Blake Bortles' stats against the Pats? All right, what do you want to fire Bill Belichick? What do you think? He's a terrible coach? So it has nothing to do with that. It's just that's Blake Bortles. And he'll probably stink up the joint this week or next week, but it's coming. But yeah, I don't know. You know, I was just talking to, I think it was Adam, and I was just saying how anytime you get the best defense in the league against the best offense in the league, on average, the best defense in the league is going to win. But I don't know. This is that's just on average. What do you think? You have a play on this one yet, or is it too early?
No, too early for me. I actually have done almost no work.
Let's throw the stats out of the equation, which obviously means everything when you're handicapping. Just any gut feeling early in the week.
A gut feeling is that Kansas City's at home, and that is an extraordinarily tough home field, and it's. You know, I think this could be a difficult spot for the Jaguars, but I'm not running to the window. And I don't know if I'm going to be laying points at any time against Jacksonville because on any day when Bortles plays well, they're going to win.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That defense it is the best defense in the league.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, that's what I said last week previewing the game on the Jet Show was it's all going to depend on what kind of start Blake Bortles gets off to. And if he gets off to a good start, you're probably in a lot of trouble. And if he gets off to a bad start, then you got a shot. Then you could beat them because he is what he is usually after the first quarter, the rest of the game. But he had one of his better games. All right, so those are two big games we'll talk more about here on the OFN in the next couple of days with Mark Lawrence and Teddy Sevransky from Covers.com. But first, let's talk a little bit more about what's going on in the NFL. Patriots, they got off the schneid with the win over the Dolphins. So at the same time, we get an opportunity to see the fact that, you know, the Patriots are the Patriots and the Dolphins are just not as good as they appear to be. So it's pretty bad for the AFC East. It's just more of the same. I guess the big question is, and I don't know where the Patriots are now. They were 10-1 to win the Super Bowl last week. I got to tell you, if they haven't dropped too much further now, like even if they're 9 or 8-1, I mean, I would probably take the Patriots this week. Why not? I mean, who else is going to beat them? But maybe Baltimore, and I can't. I'm sorry, but playoffs. I'm still going with the Patriots over the Chiefs. I would say the Ravens in my mind would be the one team playing the way they are. Historically, they have played the Patriots and beaten them before in Foxborough. I think that's the one team that has the best chance to beat them. But besides that, why not take the Patriots at 8 or 10-1 to win the Super Bowl?
Yeah, I think they're probably the third or fourth best team in the conference right now, and it's early. So, you know, his teams get better as the season goes along. So I don't think that's an unreasonable play. I mean, at that price, there's certainly something to be said for grabbing that kind of a number. If nothing else, you'd probably be able to sell out of that at some point later on. You know,
yeah, I mean,
if you have that ticket, if you have a 10-1 on anybody, and you get to the playoffs, you've got a good bet.
Yeah, I would think that that was the whole point. Really, is that I got to believe that the Patriots by the end of the season, once they get to the postseason, are going to end up somewhere about 3 or 4-1. So why wouldn't I take them at 8 or 10-1?
I mean, you know, obviously this isn't crystal ball stuff, but they're going to win the division. They're just better than the other three teams.
Yes.
So, you know, 10-1 on a division winner is a good bet.
Yeah, matter of fact, last week I was able to grab. Let's see, it was my first future report, and I was able to grab Baltimore at 33-1. And I actually threw a little bit on Carolina at 40-1, and that's just because anytime with Cam Newton, and they're looking pretty. They're looking all right. I mean, they're okay. I still think in this conference that and the way things are, I still think they can get into the postseason now that Atlanta is pretty much done. There's just too many injuries on Atlanta's defense. It needs to be emphasized every time they give up big yards. Everybody's going to talk about whatever, but no. Every week you now have to talk about injuries because this is not the same Atlanta defense. They're just banged up.
Yeah, and they're not getting healthier.
No, they're not. Those guys are gone.
It's really starting to look like it might be one of those seasons.
Yes.
For the Falcons where they just can't get their guys in the field. And on the defensive side, they just have to get those guys in the field because they have no quality depth there. I mean, they just got torched by the Bengals. I'm glad they did because I had the Bengals in the game, and it was a thrilling finish to be sure. But that's not a great.
Yeah, let me ask you a question. Why did you take the Bengals? I know Mark said he couldn't do the. I'll ask Mark, not Mark, Teddy. But if you answer the question, I won't have to ask Teddy because Teddy said I can't do that game. It's one of my plays of the week. So I didn't even ask him why. Why did you like the Bengals last week?
Well, because of the Atlanta defensive injuries. I mean, these are nobody pays attention to defensive injuries. You know, the masses pay attention to big names getting hurt. But you got three key guys out on defense, and then the report comes out in the middle of the week that Freeman's back at practice, but then he's not going to play, and he's a vital cog in the offense.
Sure.
Although they obviously didn't need him much.
Yeah, all right.
You know, the value, it was as much of it as anything else. If I can get 5, and I didn't get the best number because there had been 6, but if I can get 5 on a game where I know there's no question in my mind the line's going to come down to 3 or 3.5, I'm just going to take it because the worst thing that happens is I buy out of the bet if I don't like it on Sunday morning and have a chance for a middle. But, you know, that's part of what gambling's all about, is being able to gauge where the market's going to go on a game, and sometimes making a bet with not in terms of who you think is going to win the game, but in terms of where you think you're going to be able to get value. That's why I like to play earlier in the week, and the odd thing is I haven't done much this week. But in most weeks, I'll have played at least 3 or 4 games by Tuesday with the intent of perhaps buying out of them if necessary, but at least knowing that I'm going to get the best number.
Interesting. Okay. Let's turn college football. Couple big games, and of course the big one was Ohio State, Penn State. The setting, the score, everything kind of lived up to what we expected. Not exactly a very well played game at times. And I got to tell you, a couple of things on this one. I've always Franklin, when he got the job, considering where Penn State was, thought that was a nice hire. He's a good coach, but is he a coach that you're trying to win national championships with?
Well, look, he made a bad play call. Okay, read options in that spot.
Oh, that's awful. That's awful.
It's not the right call. I mean,
it's awful.
There's times you want to do a zone read that can really work out, but that just was not the right time to use that play. And I think he kind of admitted as such without directly referring to that play call in the postgame. I loved his postgame press conference. I thought it was absolutely sensational. And he's got the program. They are a great program at this point. They just haven't gotten to the elite level. And he says he's going to get him there. And I thought it was an inspirational post-game speech. I remain a big James Franklin fan. I think he inherited some really tough circumstances there, considering what has taken place. And Penn State is back on the map as a major power. There's no question about that. They just haven't been able to beat Ohio State by 1 point in 2 consecutive years. And I don't know how much you can knock the guy for that.
I know.
Obviously in the play call, yes. But Ohio State is an ultra-elite program. And Penn State is pretty much right there with them at this point.
I hope he has got a quarterback, under his sleeves that he feels confident about to make that statement right now. Or maybe he's just trying. Maybe he's in a recruiting battle for a top-flight quarterback coming in this season. Maybe he's got one coming in this season because he has balls to say that when McSorley's leaving. because that's going to be a major drop-off. And it happens in college, except for Alabama and Ohio State. It happens. You lose a big quarterback like McSorley, you're going to just end up in a semi type of rebuild situation unless you've got something else going on, which they really don't talent-wise. Yeah. So that is a big loss. But look,
it is. But I would say that the program is now at the point where every 2 years he should be able to recruit a 5-star quarterback.
Sure, you would hope so, especially in that region. I mean, there's tons of quarterbacks for him to recruit in that area. So, and maybe that's part of the statement, is to excite the recruits, is to come here. I mean, we're building greatness. I want you to be inspired. I want you to feel like you're coming to help us become an elite program. And that's what they need to do, especially that program. They need quarterbacks. They got to get better on defense, no question. They played better in this game. That was their best defensive performance. But I got to tell you right now, why I was dejected about the game was, and look, I had Penn State and they covered, so it wasn't like I was sour grapes there. But I was dejected about the outcome because I want to see the right teams make the playoffs when it's time to go up against Alabama. And this Ohio State team will get annihilated by Alabama. Because if Penn State's defense can do what they did to Ohio State, just imagine what Alabama's defense will do to Hoskins.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think there's Alabama and Georgia look to be pretty clearly above everybody else at this point. And, I can't wait to see those teams play one another because it's going to happen.
Yeah, matter of fact, that's why I like Georgia at whatever they are, 8-9-1 or something like that, when I took them. Because because if you look at it, they're both going to end up in the SEC championship game, more than likely. It's a neutral field. So in my situation, I'd rather go Georgia 8-1, 9-1, or whatever, than Alabama even money, when all I got to do is win one game, which will be a close game, evenly matched pretty much. And if I win that game, then I'm off to the playoffs, and I've got 8-9-1 compared to even money. So I just think it's the much better play. There's no way I would touch any team at even money in any sport this early in the season.
Yeah, and the thing of it is, even if they lose that title game,
they could be in the playoffs. Sure,
it's conceivable they'll be in the playoffs anyway.
Sure, that is possible. Now look, Georgia, you would hope if they lost, they would get enough respect if the situation were right. But we all know Alabama because, if Alabama is that's their only loss, you can guarantee they'll be in the playoffs because.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, we don't know what's going to happen. Look, if somebody goes out and gets beat 42-10, then they're not going to get in the playoffs. But if you get a close game that somebody wins by a field goal or a touchdown, the argument will be legitimate that, hey, these are still two of the best 4 teams in the country, and we got to put them both in the playoffs.
By the way,
I don't have an argument. I have no problem with that. I want the 4 best teams in, and if somebody happens to lose a game, that doesn't kick them out.
By the way, a few other reasons why I think you could take a look at the whole play calling or game management late that I didn't agree with. When Penn State had the ball at Ohio State's 38-yard line, and it was like 4th and 5, 4th and 6. I was saying right there, I'm going for it. And the reason I'm going for it is because I trust Trace McSorley more than I trust Penn State to stop Ohio State now. I've seen this story before. It was anticipated that Ohio State was going to end up scoring. I don't care where the ball was. And I'm putting the ball in the hands in that point like it's a tie game with my best player and asking him to make a play, because if he makes even just one play, gets one first down, gets 10, 15 yards, you can kick a field goal, win the game.
Yeah.
And I'd rather have done
right
that.
Move. It was just the wrong play call, that's all.
No, I was talking about the punt. Talking about the punt.
No, I agree with that.
Yeah, that set up Ohio State's last drive. Yeah, they should have went for it instead of being conservative and let's just punt the ball, play defense.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with that. I would agree with that. There's times when you go for it, and there's times when you don't. And the risk versus reward there said it's okay to go for it. It wasn't a bad. It wasn't a Frank Reich decision. I still can't believe, just dropping back in the NFL for a second. I can't believe Frank Reich, after the game, when he had time to reflect, and still saying I would do that every time. Well, then you don't know what you're doing, as far as risk versus reward is concerned. People are getting on James Franklin about the bad play call. The worst decision of the weekend was Frank Reich. Absolutely the wrong decision in terms of everything as far as risk versus reward goes. You punt the ball and take the tie in that situation.
Well,
and
here's the thing. Here's the thing. If because you know how players act. Players act like, and they all say it. They don't want to tie. I'd rather lose. I'd rather lose. All right. Now I know the coach has got to be more of a. He's got to be smarter than that, and he's got to look at the big picture. And I'd rather be in the playoffs at 8-7-1 than miss the playoffs at 8-8.
Yeah.
So that's what the coach does have to do. I think what probably happens there is that it's his first year, and he's trying to build something. He's trying to get these guys to believe in what he's preaching, and I'm going to believe in you, and hopefully you'll believe in me, and I'm going to trust that you can get this first down because I want to win a game because I'm like you. I don't want to lose. And I'd rather lose than tie. I'm like you. We're all together in this. So I can see where he was coming from.
But the thing of it is, here's the thing, is that the coach at that point has to put that, to me, he's got to put that away. Look, I mean, it's like playing poker. If you take bad gambles.
Oh, yeah, more often than not, on average, you're going to lose. Correct. Sure.
Yeah. It was a bad gamble.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't, if I'm the coach, I really don't care what the players think.
Well, here's another reason it was a bad gamble, because and this always happens when you go for it on fourth down sometimes, especially when you're not in the range of a field goal, is just because you go for it on fourth down and make it doesn't mean anything, because you could still not even go anywhere. So just because you made that first down, you still have to make plays after that just to get in the field goal range.
Well, and Greg, the thing is this, with the amount of time left, they were saying to Houston, well, we don't make this, we're going to lose the football game because Houston's going to make almost nothing.
Oh, yeah, sure. It was a tie.
And they're going to win.
It was a tie.
You can't do it.
Yeah.
And if the players are going to hang their heads about it, say we should have made more yards on first, second, and third down.
Yeah, Houston benefited because if you're on Houston's side, you're loving the fact they're going for it. You're like, thank goodness, because if you're Houston, then you'll accept the loss in that spot because your averages go up with a chance now to win. Whereas if they punt the ball, you got 0% chance of winning. So yeah.
Yeah, but Houston, if they'd have punted the ball, Houston probably would have taken a knee.
Yeah, so they benefited.
They're going to be at their own 10-yard line or something. They got no shot to move with no timeouts.
No.
They're not going to gamble in that. Look, and that's my argument to those who are defending Reich. Do you think that O'Brien's not a good coach, but do you actually think that if O'Brien had gotten the ball back in his own, let's say they even punt the ball into the end zone, it's a bad punt, and it ends up and they get the ball to 20, even O'Brien's not going to do anything foolish there and try and take a chance on a turnover.
Oh, yeah,
They're
no.
run the football,
Sure.
That's the end of the game.
Yeah, 'cause at that point, yes, tie's better than a loss, no question at that point. By the way, both teams end up with nationally televised games, and if Houston can't beat the Cowboys, I don't care what the Cowboys did with Detroit, they can't beat the Cowboys on Sunday night, then their season obviously completely over because they don't deserve it. As far as Indy, boy, is this a bad spot to come off that kind of a game, and then short week, you got to go on the road and play the Patriots. I mean, and I think the line is 10, but why wouldn't you give 10 in that spot?
No, I'm not big on playing double digits in the NFL, but I can tell you I will not be on the Colts.
All right. Also back in college, you've got the big rivalry games. Really, the biggest one is Oklahoma-Texas. This becomes a major game in the Big 12. And with Texas now looking more like the team we expected them under Herman, look, West Virginia is going to have something to say about it, but this could be who knows? We might see Oklahoma and Texas in the Big 12 championship game.
Yeah, it could definitely happen. I made the line on this game. Let me check my numbers. Let's see. 13, 22. It looks like 7.5, 8, and that's where the line is. So guess what I'm doing on that football game? I'm passing. But we do get to find out how much progress Texas has made here, and we do get to find out if Oklahoma can actually win a big football game. Because let's call it straight. When the chips have been down for the last several years at Oklahoma, and this goes well back into the Bob Stoops era. They have not been winning the big games.
But it is a Big 12 game, though. It is a Big 12 game, so they've won their share of the Big 12 games. But yeah, you get them out of the Big 12,
and not always impressively. If you look at these games with Texas, they were a much better program than
they
Texas
were. They should have blown them out.
Yeah,
they should have blown them out, and they didn't. But that's the rivalry, and that's what's fun about it. And like you said, 7-8 points. Look, in that situation, the way Texas is playing, I would go with Texas. I think that's worthy. I even think that's a worthy money line play because I could see that game being a flip of the coin game, knowing that rivalry. So in that spot, if I can get plus 260 or 280 on an 8-point dog, I would actually definitely consider that. Florida State's playing Miami this week. This used to be the best.
This is going to be interesting.
This used to be the best rivalry in college football. It's good to see that Rick was able to go to Perry because it's his job now. There ain't no question about that, and that's going to give Miami a chance to be a much better team. I'm not sold on Florida State though after what happened with Louisville. I mean, that was an ugly win, but it was a win, and that was important. And they're on a nice little 2-game win streak. But Miami's clearly better than Florida State at this point.
They are clearly better, but this is what gets interesting here. Florida State is playing for nothing now this season. They have, the best they're going to do is like a Tangerine Bowl or something like that. This is their bowl game. This is Florida State's bowl game. Whatever they've got, they're going to show in this football game. So it's a game where even though my numbers indicate that the line is actually a little low at 12.5, I think it's low for a reason. It's because I'm telling you, Florida State is going to play their butts off.
No, I agree.
They're a dangerous dog here, Greg.
Sure, I'm not. So look, the kid Perry is going to be playing in a huge. This is still like a major. This is like a Super Bowl game for a kid like that. So he's going to have to feel the pressure. That's going to definitely play into it. Look, Richt is a better coach right now than Taggart. That favors them. They're at home. That favors them a little bit. But it's not like the Orange Bowl. So, I could see why taking the points, could definitely be the case in same thing. Rivalry game, the dogs sometimes are the way to go.
Well, especially when it's at the point of the season where the team with the real incentive is the dog, even though they've looked lousy and they're just not very good. This literally is, even in the first week of October, it is their whole season. And I'll tell you this, I'll look to be going against Florida State in the game after this.
Yeah, well, that would make sense. Who are they playing?
I haven't even checked. I don't care. This is the game where Florida State puts all their eggs into this basket.
Yeah.
And the next game could be a phenomenal letdown spot. And I don't have their schedule in front of me, so I can't tell you right now who they're playing. But I'm not sure it really particularly matters.
Yeah, especially I mean, either way, especially even maybe a win even would make it a bigger letdown. They're going to be playing. Actually, they're off.
Yeah, so I'm looking at my schedule and I don't see them on it.
So that helps them out. So
that's disappointing, actually.
Yeah, but Miami's going to be in Virginia the next week, so that's potential for a little mini letdown on their behalf as well. Okay.
Yeah, and something else is that look, this will be a challenge for Rick. He's got to make sure his team isn't overconfident here, because Florida, if they look at game films from Florida State, the Miami players might think, "Boy, we got this one locked up," and that's a dangerous mindset.
Well, that all depends on recent history. So, let's see. They beat Florida State last year, and
close game.
Let's see. Actually, the last couple of years have been really close. 1 point in 2016, and 4 points last year. Last year was that touchdown pass by Rozier at the end of the game, right?
Yep.
That was that game. Okay. And then in 2015, it was a 5-point game. In 2014, it was a 4-point game. So the last 4 years have been decided by what? 4, 5, or less. So,
right. Now, the Miami backers will argue, well, those were all good Florida State teams, and this isn't. And, and on paper, just removing all the emotions.
Well, last year wasn't.
On paper, Miami is about 2 touchdowns. So the line's actually really tempting for Miami backers here. They're going to look at this and say, well, this Florida State team stinks, and we can win this by 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, I mean,
I think it's a dangerous spot.
All things considered, if you're just looking, black and white, Miami is clearly a better team than Florida State by more than the point spread. But as we know, these games aren't played on paper, and that is the difference. So,
right.
All right, Dave, appreciate it. We'll talk to you again next Tuesday. Enjoy your week covering the NFL and college football because we're into October, and that means these games become more important and more fun and more on the line, and that makes it better for us to analyze and then recap them every Tuesday. So enjoy the week. We'll talk to you next week.
Sounds good, Greg.
Thank you, Dave. That's Dave Cokin of Covers.com. You can check him out on Twitter at Dave Cokin. You could also go to his email, actually his website at smokingcokin.com. I like the web address, smokingcokin.com. All right, so thanks to Dave Cokin of smokingcokin.com. Actually, Covers. Once again, Covers.com. Actually, you know what? I was just thinking of that. I didn't put them. Let me, before I let you go, here it is. I want to remind everybody, as far as Covers.com, Covers is one of the top sites in the industry right now. They feature live scores, stats, odds, and they're considered the most convenient and entertaining source for sports news and facts, with over 45 million visits a year. So if you like to break down games in every sport for all sorts of reasons, Covers.com, you have to bookmark them on your computer. Definitely check them out multiple times a week, all throughout the football season. And that's just the football season. So, again, thanks to Dave Cokin from Covers.com and Scott Engel, RotoExperts.com. Also want to thank Adam Patrick, thevikingage.com at Fansided. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at PrimeSN. We'll let you know when these shows are available on demand. You can also email us at ofn@primesportsnetwork.com. Leave a message for us on our Twitter page. Any questions or comments, things of that nature. And by the way, for Scott, fantasy at primesportsnetwork.com. Do you have any questions or comments regarding anything in fantasy football? So that'll wrap it up here for the OFN Today on the Our-Lads Football Network. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow on this show. And I think we're scheduled for 2:30 with Mark Lawrence from Covers, Anthony Dasher talking Georgia football. You know the drill. Alpha, Mike, Foxtrot.